Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's press conference here at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I'm Anthony Rowley, the first Vice President of the club, and it's my pleasure today to moderate this event and introduce our speaker, who is seated obviously to my right, Mr. Kazuyoshi Umemoto, who is the Chief Negotiator at the government headquarters for the TPP. The TPP is very much in the news recently. As you know, it's metamorphosed from the TPP into the CPTPP, which stands for Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. It, as you know, lost one of its members. It was a 12-member group. It lost one of its members. Losing one member might not seem too serious, but when that member is the largest economy in the world, it's quite a problem. But the remaining 11 members have soldiered on, and they've put together a TPP 11, which is about, once it's been formally approved by all the parliaments, it should go into operation in the first half of next year, I'm told. So let me not take up more time, except to say that Mr. Umemoto is also Ambassador for International Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Japan. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1977 after graduating from the School of Science at the University of Tokyo, and since then he's been a distinguished career diplomat. So I'm going to stop at that point, let Mr. Umemoto take over. Let me remind you to switch off or put your Keitai Denwa onto silent mode as a courtesy to our speaker. So please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowley. Thank you for your kind words. I feel very pleased and privileged to be here to talk to you about TPP. Now the official name is Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement on TPP, CPTPP. And this I have to practice, sometimes, so that I can now pronounce it quite well. But we officials of the government of Japan prefer to call it TPP 11, to distinguish from the original TPP 12, from which U.S. Unfortunately decided to withdraw. So anyway, whatever you call it, we now have a TPP 11. We were able to conclude the negotiation in the last chief negotiators meeting in Shinjuku the end of last month. So we are now making a preparation for the signature ceremony to be held in Chile on March the 8th. When TPP 12 was the negotiation concluded in 2016, Japanese government was one of the first to actually complete the domestic procedures. Incidentally, the TPP, we don't use the word ratification, although basically this is the same procedure. You need to get the approval of the Diet, and then and also you need to get the approval for the implementing legislation. So Japan was one of the first to do it, and we were able to do it. And then U.S. government, U.S. President Mr. Trump was elected, and one of the first things that he did was to sign a presidential memorandum to withdraw U.S. from the TPP. That was, we feel, a long time ago, but it's just about 1 year ago. And then at the time, other 11 countries were sort of at a loss what to do. Because TPP 12 has GDP requirements for it to become effective. So without US, TPP 12 will never become effective. But after more than 5 years of very intensive negotiations, and the high quality set of rules incorporated into the TPP 12. We really believe, government of Japan and as well as other governments of 11 countries believe that this is something that quite befitting the 21st century. High standard, rule-based, multilateral, liberal trading system, which should be the foundation for the future of the Asia-Pacific region's prosperity and stability. But anyway, without US were the leading force. Without the US involvement, we could never have come to a conclusion of the TPP 12. In the last months, Mr. Froman was very active, and his negotiating technique was not always pleasant for his counterparts, but anyhow, he managed to seal the deal. But without US, what should we do? Then there was a time of a sense of loss, sense of drifting. So what should we do? And then Chile, one of the members of the original core concept of TPP, because it started with P4, Chile, Singapore, Brunei, New Zealand. So Chile convened the ministerial in March last year. And then a lot of TPP ministers went. And as you know very well, March is the time for Japan, diet deliberations on budget. So from Japan, minister was not able to go. So instead, the senior vice minister went. And then he was surrounded by other ministers of other countries. Well, this is a hearsay because I was not chief negotiator then. I joined this team only last July. But many people told me that other ministers from other countries sort of disappointed. From Japan, only no minister came. And then it was, of course, diplomatically, but a very clear message was conveyed to us. If we are to be successful in TPP 11, it should be Japan. Japan should take the lead role. Otherwise, 11 countries will not be able to go anywhere. So that's the message that you have to take back to Japan and convey that to the senior level of the government. And which actually happened. And then that really not really changed the perception of Japanese government, but that reinforced the determination of Prime Minister Abe and Japanese government to put a lot of priority for the TPP 11. Of course, at that time, we didn't call it TPP 11. So after Chile, there was a ministerial meeting in Hanoi, May last year, and then ministers from 11 countries agreed that there should be some way to keep the momentum of the TPP, and then 11 countries should think about how best we can implement what TPP is meant as soon as possible. So ministers instructed officials to find an alternative for the early implementation of TPP. So that's the sort of a starting point of the negotiation of TPP 11. I was Japanese ambassador in Italy, and as you can imagine, I had a rather comfortable life. Although 2017 was the year of Italian presidency in the G7 summit, so although I had a rather comfortable life there, but I was quite busy preparing for all the logistical arrangement for the G7 and so on. But anyway, and then I was told from Tokyo to come back to Tokyo after the summit meeting. So I came back in July. And many people told me, well, TPP 11, of course, Japanese government is trying very hard to somehow find a way to have a new sort of a way of implementing what we try to do in TPP 12. And I was told by foreign minister, well, it will be very difficult, maybe frustrating, and the result may not be as satisfactory as we might, expect. So anyhow, that was when I came back July. And July, we had the first chief negotiators meeting in Hakone. By the way, in front of you, I have asked this handout to be distributed. So you can see this. So Hakone was the first CN meeting, and then almost every month we negotiated for a TPP, a new TPP. In Hakone, we came to a sort of a broad understanding for the negotiation of a new TPP. Let's not touch the market access commitments. TPP is a really very comprehensive agreement. This is the text of the TPP. And it consists of market access commitments and the rules. Rules have a wide range of modern rules: intellectual property rights, state-owned enterprises, investment, labor, environment, and so on. So, but market access commitments are really is the result of a number of bilateral negotiations: Japan-US, Japan-Canada, Canada-US. So it's a sort of the result of a great number of bilateral plus multilateral negotiations, and it's a sort of a give and take, and it's a sort of many combinations, 50 or 60 combinations of two countries within the 12. Once you start touching, changing these market access commitments, well, I agree to give it because you agreed to give it. So that will most likely unravel the agreement. So at the outset, we came to a broad understanding. Let's try not to touch market access commitments. Then let's try to limit to the minimum any modification or changes. But let's do it in this way. No modification, but just to try to suspend certain rules until US comes back. So after such a discussion, the basic format of the negotiation was, well, starting from TPP 12. Market access commitments will be there, no change. Some rules, if there's a consensus, can be suspended. Suspended means no application. But if US comes back to TPP, then original TPP will become operational. That means suspended items will become operational. So, and then what kind of rules should be or would be suspended? Maybe those rules which the suspension of such kind of rule, if can be an incentive for US to come back, or can be a disincentive for US to stay outside, then that will be sort of a logically good. So as a result of that, you can see we proceeded along this line, and we were able to stick to this principle towards the end. So the TPP 11 agreement that we were able to conclude was the second page outline of TPP 12. It's very short, Article 1 to Article 7. So original TPP have more than 600 provisions, but we now have only 7 articles. Why? Because Article 1 incorporates the TPP agreement. So although it's article is very only 7, but TPP is incorporated, but certain provisions will be suspended. So that's Article 2. So that's the basic structure of the new TPP. And then list of suspended provisions, we were able to limit the number to just about 20. Some of them very technical, but half of them related to intellectual property rights. Because intellectual property rights, of course, that's one of the areas why we call this TPP high standard rules. So on the one hand, we would like to keep them as intact, but on the other, these rules were very sensitive, are very sensitive to many members, and these provisions were somehow put there by a strong pressure from US vis-a-vis many countries. So many countries wanted to suspend these IP provisions because these were the items that they grudgingly accepted it with a strong pressure from US. So now that US is not there, why do we have to do that? So that's the reason, rationale for suspending this. And also IP rules, this is different from market access because once the rule we agree to apply, this will be applicable not only to the 11 members but also to the US as well. So that will allow a free ride of the US. So that's why many IP provisions are suspended. But anyhow, we feel very proud that we were able to limit the number of suspensions to only 22. Of course, many members would have liked to see a much longer list. But one of the main rationale for keeping this difference between original TPP 12 and TPP 11 minimum is that we would like, one of the rationale is that by somehow coming to an early implementation, only a slightly changed form of a TPP is to induce US to come back. Not in the immediate future, but after some time, this will incentivize US to come back. So that's how we conducted the negotiations. Basically, this is the first time for Japan to take a leadership role in trade negotiations. I myself had some experience as a WTO director in the foreign ministry, and in just about 20 years ago, so it's a long time ago. But the standard sort of a type of Japanese trade negotiation was always on the receiving end. Always aware that there are sensitive areas, particularly in agriculture. So it's how to protect a certain sensitive agricultural area was the main objective of the negotiation. Although, of course, Japan as a big trading nation, we always favored trade liberalization in general, but we always have to be on a sort of a defensive side. But for the first time, perhaps, this TPP-11, we were able to take a leadership role. And of course, it was a kind of a trial and error experience. Maybe after the ministerial in Da Nang, November, 95% of our energy was spent on issues not directly related to Japan. There was some pending issue between one country and another country. So we spent a lot of time persuading these two countries to come to a compromise solution so that we can solve a number of remaining issues which we were not able to conclude in Da Nang ministerial in November. So now we were able to conclude the negotiation, so we are now ready for signature. And we very much hope that there will be no hiccup in the last minutes before the signature. And then entry into force, Article 3 of the new TPP agreement, it's 6 countries. And after 6 countries completed the domestic procedures, then after 60 days, TPP will become effective. So Japanese government is planning to submit the treaty new agreement as well as implementing legislation to the current regular session of the Diet, so that we can complete the domestic procedures by this summer. And we expect some other countries to do the same. So if things go smoothly, we hope that the critical mass of 6 countries will be reached either by the end of this year or by the beginning of next year. And then maybe in the first half of next year, we hope that TPP or new TPP, TPP-11, will become effective. So the history of TPP goes back to 2010 or even before. So at long last, TPP will become effective and implementation will start. So I very much hope that this will actually happen. And once TPP becomes effective, then we can start discussions on accession. So this TPP is aimed at open system, open rule-based multilateral liberal trade system. So if any country is interested, any country is willing to abide by the rules, high standard rules of TPP, then we can talk about accession. Of course, the decision will be made by consensus, but the original idea of creating an institution or the rule-based institution in Asia-Pacific region as a sort of a kind of infrastructure for the 21st century of trade and investment. So any country interested in the new TPP is basically welcome. So, of course, now, of course, our priority is to make sure that the signature actually happens, and then we will make a lot of efforts to make sure that the agreement takes effect as soon as possible, and then accession and the actual implementation will start. So we will continue to be fairly busy, but the frustration and stress of negotiation is over. So that's how I feel now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. That was very interesting, as much for what is left out of the agreement as what's still in it. But perhaps just I'd like to ask a quick question myself, which is, given that the United States is no longer in, and given that there are these areas left out that you have mentioned, how meaningful is this TPP 11 going to be in terms of its economic impact? I mean, obviously nowhere near as strong as it would have been originally. So where is its chief value going to be in this new form?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, there are two things that I would like to point out. Of course, we don't know whether US will be coming back or not in the foreseeable future. But without TPP 11, there will be nothing that US will be able to come back to. So we still hope that one day US will be a part of this partnership. And then, according to analysis of economic impact, and we conducted the same kind of economic impact analysis using the GTAP, Global Trade Analysis Project model. And the real GDP increases for Japan will be about 1.5%. Original TPP 12, the similar method of economic impact analysis said it's about 2.5%. So, of course, TPP 11 is much, much smaller, just about half or in terms of trade volume and so on. But the economic impact is a little bit more than half. So, 1.5%, of course, you know, whether it's big or small, it's difficult to tell. But it's approximately 8 trillion yen. And this is not only a one-time sort of a temporary increase, but it's a permanent increase. So I think this will have a good impact. And also to establish the precedent of this a set of high standard rules is also a big, I think.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the working press first. Sorry, you are. Yes. I just couldn't see you. I couldn't see you.
Süddeutsche Zeitung, Neidhardt. The motivation of the US was never purely economical. I think it was Robert Gates who said TPP is like an additional aircraft carrier in East Asia. Now, you have half an aircraft carrier of the Americans without the Americans. What's the 11 countries' position to this strategic idea to have a military aspect of TPP?
I don't think we have any specific idea about the TPP and the military aspect. Of course, you know, to have a system of rule-based trade liberalization or trade system will be a stabilizing element, because and of course among the 11 countries we will have a lot of discussions on in implementing the agreement, so that will make us much closer. And so in that sense, politically will we become even more closer among the 11, and that will be good for the stability. But that has no direct impact on the military aspect. So I'm not sure whether I understand your question correctly, but of course it has a strategic sort of element by deepening the friendly relationship, cooperative relations among 11 countries by having this kind of agreement. but that has no direct impact on military side.
Okay, Robin, I think you raised your hand fractionally.
Robin Harding from the Financial Times. Britain has expressed an interest in joining TPP. What do you think about that idea, and what would it look like if Britain did join? Thank you.
Yes, we noted the FT article. We were quite intrigued. But as I said, the purpose of the TPP, the objective, strategic objective of TPP is to establish a rule-based multilateral trade system befitting the 21st century. And it's an open system. So any country, any economy willing to abide by the rules and willing to become a part of it is basically welcome, and decision will be made on the consensus basis among the original signatories or the members at the time. So in that sense, why not? But at the same time, of course, we don't know what would happen to Brexit, and so there are lots of unknowns before we make, or before the UK makes a decision to whether to seek membership or not, and so it's only a speculation. But in principle, TPP is an open system.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Okay, just quickly.
So, in your view, does it make sense for Britain to join, particularly in comparison with the idea of a UK-Japan free trade agreement separately? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, UK-Japan is one idea, and UK joining TPP 11 is another idea. But this is my personal. You negotiation takes about the same time, then you can have one or you can have 11. So I think there's a point, but still it's too early to talk about it in a definitive way.
Okay.
Isabel Reynolds from Bloomberg. Last year you had some last-minute difficulties with Canada about the agreement. Are you absolutely 100% sure they're going to sign it on March the 8th? And if they are, does this mean that all the side letters are completed? I understand there's one between Japan and Canada about the auto industry. Has that been completed, and what does it contain?
Okay. From my experience, I wish I could say 100%, but maybe 99%, 99999, sure. Well, I'm sure that Canada will sign. I think there's somebody from Canadian embassy here, or I don't know. But well, Mr. Trudeau talked about the TPP in Davos. And he was he sounded very committed. So I expect Canada to sign. And all the work is proceeding on that basis. As in the case of TPP 12, there will be a number of side letters. And those side letters will be signed and exchanged at the time of the signature of the agreement. And they will be made public. Of course, when we say that we concluded the negotiations, that means all the negotiations for side letters were also concluded. So we are now, and we means all 11 countries are now going through a domestic procedures so that we'll be able to sign the agreement and side letters. Yes.
Siegfried Knittel, freelancer from Germany. President Trump said maybe the US will attend TPP again, but not in the same TPP. What is there a chance? What do you think if the US wants to attend the TPP? Will be there new negotiations? Because the US is a big market and a big would be very important to bring US in the TPP. But on the other side, you said TPP should not be changed, not be opened again. It makes it more difficult. So, how do you see this problem with attending a US?
As a government official of Japan, maybe I cannot speculate on what is really meant by Mr. Trump's comments. But Prime Minister Abe, Minister Motegi made it quite clear that, well, if US has become a little bit more positive about TPP, that's something that we welcome. Which TPP is your question? We don't know. The fact remains that, as I explained, TPP 11 is only slightly different from TPP 12 by these 20-some suspensions, and also some difference in entry into force and access and so on. And we decided not to touch market access commitments. And it took us 7 months, 8 months for negotiations, very, very hard and tough and intensive negotiations. So to have another TPP, whatever it's called, would be, I don't know, not so easy. So it's a sort of a in practical terms, as a negotiator, to have another third TPP, I don't think we'll be able to do that in the near future. No humans. You know.
Patrick Welte, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. If you compare TPP 11 or TPP 12, if you compare that to other free trade agreements Japan have closed or have negotiated, where do you see the major differences? Is this a step forward? And if so, in what sense?
Yes. In terms of market access commitments, this is maybe as far as we can go. So in comparison with the previous FTAs, decision to open market, the degree of opening market is much, much bigger in TPP in terms of agricultural products and so on. And also the set of rules. There are lots of WTO plus rules. Rules on intellectual property rights, rules on state-owned enterprises, rules on electronic commerce, and so on. So, so this is by far most comprehensive and advanced kind of agreement that we have.
Corey Baird, Japan Times. How will this agreement, TPP 11, help Japan going forward for other regional agreements? And how does the TPP 11 also fit into Japan's broader goal to engage other parts of Asia China and other people who haven't gotten in on maybe one belt and one road. Today, it was just reported by Reuters and Bloomberg that Japan is considering doing another infrastructure agreement with India, Australia, and the United States. How does that deal kind of fit in with this TPP deal as well? Thank you.
Okay. Well, my first bureaucratic answer is that I'm not dealing with those things, so I cannot say anything authoritative. But we hope that the successful conclusion of TPP 11 will have a positive effect on negotiations of RCEP and others, because although I am only responsible for TPP, but a lot of other negotiators are doing more than one negotiations. So those negotiators who were a part of TPP negotiations were part of the RCEP and so on. So TPP, this has sort of a kind of standard setting element. So TPP, these countries have agreed on this set of agreements. That's a fact that everybody can refer to. And in terms of economic sort of development or per capita income, Vietnam is part of this. So Vietnam can agree to this and that and that. Why can't you do that? And so that kind of conversation can possibly take place in other negotiations. So that will have a positive impact on other negotiations. And
infrastructure scheme.
Yeah, infrastructure scheme is something that I'm not competent to talk about. But well, I'm still struggling how to make sure that the signature takes place smoothly and then entry into force. So I'm afraid I cannot make any comment on that.
Sorry, are you working press? Yes, does it, please.
Yoshihota, freelance. Thank you for coming to the club today. I have a question on the RCEP and the TPP. RCEP, as you know, another comprehensive economic agreement is underway, including China. If the RCEP is approved by the 16 countries, is RCEP undermining a TPP? How much is in terms of provisions and rules, no overlap in the two agreements?
I don't think there will be inconsistency between RCEP and TPP. Maybe TPP will be, in terms of the rules, more advanced, more comprehensive than RCEP. So some countries may not feel comfortable with the TPP rules, but still a subset of rules can be agreed upon in RCEP. So maybe according to the each country's requirement, maybe some countries can just choose to be in the RCEP and then think about joining the TPP later or something like that. So you will be given more alternatives. And of course, RCEP, you have a wider membership, so that's sort of a big advantage for RCEP. But at the same time, TPP has sort of another advantage. It's a more sort of advanced set of rules, and also the higher degree of liberalization, market liberalization.
Could I just quickly follow up on that very quickly? I mean, when Mr. Trump pulled America out of the TPP, it was said that America was giving up the right to make the trade rules in Asia, investment rules, and that China would take it over. Is that an exaggeration, do you think? Or is that in fact going to be the case? Is the US effectively giving up the option to make the rules in Asia?
Of course, it's not that somebody formulate a rule and impose that on others. The countries would have to agree on a set of rules to be governed by the rules. So, and if nobody does it, or no agreement can be formulated. So TPP 12, it was the US which actually drove the process. So even though we took over, but the original concept and the original idea was US-led. So somebody has to think of that. Of course, does China have sort of a alternative set of rules to be applicable to everybody? So it's a sort of a competition of ideas. If somebody has a better idea for all of us, then, and also not only ideas, but also ways to make sure that those rules be there to be abided by. So that's a competition in a certain way.
Right. Anyone? Robin, I think you wanted to ask a second question. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. On the US, you say it's basically designed to encourage the US to come back, with incentives for coming back and disincentives for staying out. Given the US wants to negotiate a bilateral deal with Japan, isn't that a slightly hostile approach to the US, basically asserting, do it our way?
Well, one of the big reasons why we put a lot of energy on TPP is the set of rules. And set of rules not only by just Japan and US or Japan and bilateral, but by 11 countries. And that would set the precedent for a lot of others. So that's why we would like the US to come back to the TPP.
And not do a bilateral deal?
Bilateral deal, well, of course, that's not our preferred option. But at the same time, we do not exclude the possibility. But I don't think that there's any specific idea on either side.
Sorry, are you working press or not? You're not. Any more questions from working press before we open up the floor to? All right, go ahead, please.
I'm Takeshi Hara, a member of this club. I'm sorry, my question is a little bit deviation from today's briefing, but this is important. My question is whether or not the negotiation or preliminary discussion was conducted on the opening up of Japan's natural insurance policy system in bilateral deals between United States and America. I presume this question was prior to your assignment, but very important. So I would like to hear your comments or opinion, if you could. Thank you.
I don't think I will have any comment on that. And during the 7 months of very intensive discussion, no word about this came out, because US is not there.
No,
yeah. And at least in TPP 11, that was not an issue.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Now it's Sawayama from the Asahi Shimbun. I understand any attempt at a concession or renegotiation with the United States may risk the entire deal unraveling. But on the other hand, I think if the 11 countries succeed in bringing the U.S. back on track, it will be of strategic significance. So, may I ask how would you tell me a little bit more in detail about how you think Japan should spearhead a strategic move to bring the United States back and resuscitate the deal going forward?
As the one who went through all these difficult negotiations, intensive negotiations, our priority now is to make sure that TPP 11 becomes effective. We spent so much time in negotiating, and now is the time that we are, the entry into force is within our sight. So that's something that we prioritize. Of course, we can speculate about what we do if U.S. Wants to negotiate or whatever. But speculation in the abstract doesn't lead us to anywhere. Of course, when the time comes, if both sides have much more clearer idea of what we or they want to, then, of course, we will sit down and talk in detail. But now it's only speculation, so maybe as a sort of official, the priority is to get the thing done. And once TPP becomes effective, it's not too late to start discussing on these things. So maybe that's how I see the situation.
Realistically, how could China ever hope to join this agreement? I mean, it has not exactly prohibitions, but it has regulations against the dominance of state-owned companies in the economy, for instance. And China's economy is, of course, very largely state-owned. So isn't this effectively a way of keeping China out of the TPP?
Well, state-owned enterprises, so long as they operate on the basis of commercial considerations, they will be, they have a sort of a role. So the rule of the state-owned enterprises chapter is to avoid any sort of a distortion on economic activities. So, of course, Vietnam is also another communist country, and Vietnam, of course, wants to use TPP for their reform efforts. So, by having these set of rules does not mean that we are, using this as a sort of a mean to exclude China. If China, as a modern economy, wants to adopt a certain kind of the rules, then why not? This is an open system.
Yes, it doesn't.
Okay. Patrick Walter once again, Frankfurter Allgemeine. Thinking back to my students' days, there was the praise of a multilateral global trade system, WTO or GATT at that time. And then started these regional trade agreements coming up. And the fear at that time was that in the end it might lead to some kind of trilateral trading blocs competing to each other. So now you have TPP, and that might be the nucleus of a trading bloc in Asia. In Europe, you have the EU, and let's see what happens with the UK. And US, you just don't know right now. Do you see that there is do you see a scenario that there might be some kind of trading blocs competing each other, or other way around? Put the question other way around: is TPP and these other trade agreements, regional trade agreements, are they going to suck up this spaghetti bowl of bilateral trade agreements, so that in the end we will have several regional trade agreements in the world?
when Japanese government decided to start bilateral or plurilateral FTA, there was a lot of discussion within the government, because traditionally government of Japan position was the WTO or GATT should be the central forum. But after Uruguay round, WTO has not been successful in reaching a sort of a multilateral trade liberalization agreement. So I think out of necessity came the efforts for the plurilateral or regional or bilateral FTAs. But WTO agreements allow these regional agreements. So these regional agreements should be consistent with WTO agreements. So that makes these agreements, of course, well, the block is the word, in a general kind of word as well, one can use the trade block. But in terms of WTO terminology, this is not really an exclusive trade block. So this is open, and this is consistent with WTO. And we hope that these agreements will spearhead the multilateral trade liberalization efforts. So maybe not all countries can achieve the same level at the same time, so there will be some time difference. But in the end, these agreements will be a sort of playing a role of avant-garde or whatever, so that the overall trade liberalization in the global economy will proceed.
We have precisely 2 minutes, so if anyone has a very brief burning question, now is your chance to ask. No. Can I just very briefly ask you very quickly, Mr. Trump must know that the TPP is incredibly complex and comprehensive. Does Mr. Trump seriously do you think that he can achieve the same thing with a series of bilateral agreements, the same kind of scope that the TPP has?
My very honest answer is I don't know. Whether he has ever seen this or not, I don't know. So I cannot speculate.
All right. Okay. Well, we are up against time, unfortunately. It is 3:59. Thank you very much indeed. You had one grilling before during the TPP negotiations. You've now had another grilling before this club. But we'd love you to come back again sometime and give us another briefing. And let me offer you a 1-year honorary membership of the club.
Thank you.
Please make use of it whenever you feel. Okay. And thank you very much indeed for your